welcome. Before we dive into the deep end today, I just really want to offer a sincere divine blessing for your day and, the week ahead.
Absolutely.
May you find peace in your work,
Yeah.
uh, clarity in your challenges, and a really deep sense of purpose in whatever you set your hands to do today. We're just thrilled you're joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So I want you to imagine uh, buying this massive piece of prime real estate. You sign the papers, you hand over the money, you move in. But there is a legally binding, mathematically fixed catch.
And it's a big one.
Right.
Mhm.
In exactly 49 years, you have to give that property back to the family of the person who sold it to you.
Yeah.
No buyouts, no loopholes. The clock is just ticking from the moment you sign.
It completely shatters our modern conception of what it means to actually own something.
It really does. And today, we're taking a deep dive into an ancient text that had this, well, essentially a mandatory economic reset button built right into its core. We're looking at ancient socioeconomic systems, specifically through Leviticus chapter 25.
Right, a fascinating text.
And our sources today are the study notes and translated texts from two distinct study Bibles. We've got the Holman Study Bible and the NWDA Study Bible.
Both really excellent resources for this kind of deep dive.
For sure. And our mission today is to uncover how ancient Israel structured its society to, well, prevent generational poverty, handle debt, and basically how they viewed land ownership altogether.
Yeah, because people tend to approach these ancient texts as, purely religious documents. But when you look at Leviticus 25, you're essentially looking at this highly sophisticated economic blueprint.
Oh, wow.
It's an ancient attempt to solve the exact same problems of wealth inequality and, cyclical poverty that economists are literally still arguing about right now.
Okay, let's unpack this because we really need to start with the foundation of this whole system, which is the concept of the Sabbath year.
Right.
You probably know the idea of the Sabbath day, like working for 6 days and resting on the seventh. But this text scales that concept up from the human body to the land itself.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. Every seventh year, the earth gets a mandatory break, like extreme PTO for the dirt. You cannot sow your fields, you can't prune your vineyards, no commercial harvesting.
It's a radical piece of agricultural legislation, and it's not a suggestion, right? It's a hardline law.
But let's look at the logistics here. How do you survive if you literally aren't allowed to farm for a whole year?
Yeah.
Isn't that just collective economic suicide?
What's fascinating here is how the text addresses that exact panic. Because practically, it's an enormous ask. You're staring at your empty fields. Winter is coming.
Right, you'd be terrified.
Exactly. But there's this divine safety net built directly into the text. God promises a supernatural bumper crop in the 6th year.
But wait, a slightly better harvest doesn't cover an entire year off.
Oh, it's not just a little extra grain. The text specifies it'll produce enough food to last for 3 full years.
Wait, really? 3 years from one harvest?
Yeah. Think about the timeline here. The 6th year harvest sustains them through the rest of the 6th year, entirely covers the unplanted 7th year, and keeps them alive through the 8th year until the new crops are finally ready.
That is just an immense amount of trust. And, well, a massive logistical effort in food storage. You're hoping the grain doesn't rot. But what about the stuff that just grows on its own during that 7th year, like volunteer crops or wild grapes?
So the sources point out this amazing egalitarian provision. Basically, whatever grows naturally during that 7th year is completely free for everyone to eat equally.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the landowner, the servants, the hired workers, foreign residents, even the livestock and wild animals.
So if I'm a wealthy landowner, my private orchard essentially becomes a public park for a year.
Precisely. It completely levels the playing field. The richest guy and the poorest transient worker are foraging from the exact same vine.
Right.
It acknowledges God's provision, and, it gives the soil a much-needed ecological rest.
That is incredible. But if the 7-year reset sounds radical, the text takes it even further.
Oh, much further.
Yeah, after 7 cycles of those 7 years, so 49 years, you hit the 50th year, the year of Jubilee.
The ultimate reset.
Right. It kicks off on the Day of Atonement, the 10th day of the 7th month, with this massive blasting of a trumpet. And the NWA source notes that the word Jubilee actually relates to the Hebrew word for a ram's horn, or shofar.
Yeah, the instrument itself names the year.
Imagine hearing that horn blast. Depending on your bank account, that sound means 2 very different things.
Well, to really understand it, we have to look at the surrounding ancient cultures. Using the Holman study notes, we see that in the ancient Near East, kings would actually sometimes grant amnesties or cancel debts.
Oh, they did? Like to win favor.
Exactly. A new king takes the throne, cancels debts to pacify the peasants or stop a rebellion. It was totally based on the whim of a human ruler.
Ah, so it was a political tool.
Right. But Israel's Jubilee was entirely different. It was decreed by God at a set, unchangeable interval.
Which means it couldn't be manipulated for political gain.
Exactly. But I do want to add a vital clarification from the NWA source here. Jubilee was an exemption and liberty event, but it was not a total equalization of all wealth.
Meaning they didn't just pool everything together and divide it equally.
Right. No, things like cattle and liquid money were not reallocated. It was specifically about restoring ancestral property and personal freedom.
Which naturally shifts us to how real estate transactions actually worked. Because here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, the math on this is fascinating.
Technically, Israelites couldn't actually sell their land permanently. It's essentially an ancient lease agreement, right?
Yeah.
You aren't buying the dirt, you're buying the number of harvests left until the next Jubilee.
Yeah, it's a highly sophisticated pricing model. The prices went up if there were many years until the Jubilee, and they went down if there were only a few.
Because you're basically renting it for a shorter time.
Exactly. And the theological core driving this is God literally declaring in the text, "The land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers."
But reading through the sources, I noticed this massive zoning loophole. I'm hoping you can explain this. Why are walled cities treated so differently?
Ah, yeah. So houses in walled cities had a 1-year redemption period. If you didn't buy it back in a year, the sale was permanent. It didn't revert in the Jubilee.
Wait, why? Doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of keeping property in the family?
Well, because houses in walled cities weren't agricultural land. They didn't produce food. Walled cities were commercial hubs for tradespeople. The Jubilee is about preserving the means of production, the farmland.
Oh, that makes sense. A townhouse doesn't grow wheat.
Right. But houses in unwalled villages were considered part of the open fields, so those did revert.
And there's an exception for the Levites, right?
Yes. The Levites lived in 48 specific cities, and they had a permanent right to redeem their houses at any time, maintaining their designated inheritance.
Okay, so let's pivot from real estate to the human element here. Losing your farm usually meant you had fallen into severe poverty. How did the law treat the poor and the indebted?
So there's this concept called the resgatador, or the kinsman redeemer.
Right.
If an Israelite became poor and sold their property, a close relative had the right, and really the duty, to buy it back to keep it in the family. The Holman source specifically connects this to the famous biblical story of Ruth and Boaz.
Oh, where Boaz steps up to redeem the estate.
Exactly.
And the rules for treating poor countrymen were strict. They were commanded to support them and strictly forbidden from charging interest on money or demanding profit on food. So what does this all mean? How does a society even function without interest?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the rationale in the text is theological. Over and over, the justification is, "I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt."
So their own liberation dictates their economic compassion.
Right. They can't oppress each other because they remember being oppressed.
Which brings us to the most severe consequence of poverty, which is selling oneself into servitude. And I want to be really clear to the listener here. We are simply unpacking the text's historical framework as presented in the study Bibles. We're not taking a stance or endorsing these ancient practices.
Right, we're just looking objectively at what the text says.
Exactly. So what happened if an Israelite hit rock bottom?
If an Israelite sold themselves to a fellow Israelite, the law strictly forbade treating them as a slave. They had to be treated as a hired worker or a temporary resident.
So no ruthless ruling over them.
Right. And most importantly, they and their children had to be released in the year of Jubilee to return to their ancestral property.
Because they were already God's servants, brought out of Egypt, they couldn't be sold as permanent property.
Precisely. But maintaining our objective textual analysis here, the sources do state that Israelites were permitted to buy slaves from surrounding nations or foreign temporary residents.
And those individuals could be kept permanently.
Yes, and passed down as inheritance.
But what if an Israelite sold themselves to a wealthy foreigner living in the land?
The text guarantees they always retain the right of redemption. An uncle or cousin could buy their freedom, or they could buy it themselves if they earned enough.
And the buyout price was regulated, right?
Yeah, strictly prorated based on the years left until the Jubilee. This raises an important question, though. It asks us to consider how intricately These laws attempted to balance ancient economic realities with the deeply rooted theology of liberation.
It really is a massive system of fail-safes. Basically, Leviticus 25 presents a society where the economy is fundamentally subordinate to theology.
Yeah.
The land of the people ultimately belonged to God.
Mhm.
And systems like the Sabbath year and the Jubilee were designed to prevent permanent generational ruin.
It's all about stopping that endless downward spiral.
Exactly. And it leaves me with this thought to mull over. In our modern world of, permanent property ownership, endless compounding interest in this modern gig economy, what would a secular equivalent of a jubilee even look like?
Wow, yeah, a total systemic reset.
Right. Forgiving debt, restoring baseline livelihoods. Could our modern financial systems even survive that kind of reset?
It's definitely something to think about.
It really is. Well, that wraps up our deep dive today. Thank you so much for joining us. God blesses all the listeners. See you next time.